Hi, my name is Woj. I'm the head judge for World Street Workout and Calisthenics Federation for power and endurance. We're going to talk about movement standards for power today, starting with max body weight bar muscle ups. First, let's talk about the setup. This band here represents maximum permitted amount of swing when initiating our bar muscle up, and also it creates a boundary for how much our legs are allowed to move up during the transition and at the very initiating point of the muscle up. The band is set at exactly 30 degrees. It is supposed to be observed by the side judge by directly side on around middle of the band. So the side judge needs to be exactly to the side of it to observe the swing correctly. Number one thing in a setup is arms locked out before we come off the box. The amount of swings permitted is at the disclosure of the athlete. You can go on the first swing, you could go on the back swing. That is totally down to athlete's preference. I encourage to bend one leg and make sure the height of the box is similar to mine. I'm going to swing off the box and make sure that my total swing does not exceed the band, like so. And from that position, I'm allowed to initiate the muscle up. A few things to point out in regards to this band setup is our foot can exceed the point of the band because we're looking at the ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, elbow, wrist line, and not necessarily how far our foot is sticking out. So as long as your heel or your ankle joint stays behind the band, that's fine. Another thing that we do allow is if you're keeping your chin tucked under, the head can protrude past the band, and that will not invalidate your attempt. It's just something to be mindful of. Your chest, your hips, or your knees, or your ankle must not swing beyond the band when you initiate your bar muscle up, but only when you're initiating it, or when you're performing your transition and you're performing your fold onto the bar. So between the swings, you're allowed to swing however much you need. If you need to take a couple of swings, maybe to reduce your swing and find the right groove, that's also permitted. Again, I encourage to start with split legs to avoid bending of the arms. We perform nice, gentle swing. When ready, perform the muscle up, lockout at the top. So we've got full lockout at the bottom of the movement, full lockout at the top. In this position, you're allowed to stay and rest here for up to a count of 3 seconds. So 1, 2, 3. At this point, I must initiate yet another muscle up rep. 1, 2, 3. If you're still stationary and the word 3 has been completed, that basically concludes your run. However, if the front judge says 3 and you're starting to move downwards, then you are welcome to continue. The height of the transition is totally down to athlete's preference. Some athletes prefer to perform high transitions, like so. Some athletes prefer low transitions. Both of these will be permitted at athlete's discretion as long as the legs don't visibly exceed the point of the band. So if my feet at that top position stick out past the band, that will invalidate my rep. If during my run I get no rep by any of the judges, does not mean that my round is concluded. I'm allowed to continue for however long I feel like as an athlete, as long as I don't exceed the 3 seconds on the top and I don't let go of the bar. Resting and letting release the hands on the top of the bar will not be permitted. However many swings you want to perform between each muscle up is also totally at your discretion. So for example, if I wish to perform a back swing, that's also totally permitted. Now let's talk about examples of no reps for bar muscle up. The first one, and probably the most common, is going to be an initiation of the muscle up with slightly bent knees, or initiating and then bending the knees. So if the athlete, because either mechanical restrictions or preference, keeps their knees very, very slightly bent throughout the movement, throughout the whole length of the movement, and they're set at slight bend, that will be permitted. However, if the athlete stays with straight legs, and then as they begin to initiate their muscle up, they bend them, that will invalidate the rep. The distinction is if there is any inconsistency in the knee bend, and there is a little bit of a flex there, that will invalidate your rep. For example, and it doesn't matter if it's both knees or one knee. That's a no rep due to right knee bending. That's a no rep due to both knees bending. Hip drive or leg lift, or excessive hip drive or leg lift. One, when it happens prematurely, aka when the athlete is not yet initiating their transition, but still in the pull section. When the legs exceed the restriction of the band. So excessive leg lift, that's on the initiation. And that's on the transition or the dip part. Both of these reps are invalid. Another no rep we kind of partially discussed is going to be bending of the elbows before initiating the muscle up, or at the very beginning when you're initiating your first muscle up. So an example of an invalid rep on the first one is going to be where I start with bent arms and keep them bent as my feet exit or release from the box. So here's an example. This will be an invalid rep due to elbow bent on the first rep. Here's an example on the consecutive reps. Again, elbow must come to a full stretch and lock out between every single rep, both at the bottom and at the top. A downward movement during transition. So when athlete is going from a pull into a dip, if they lose control and there is a little bit of a backwards movement of the elbow or the shoulder as they are supposed to be rolling over the bar and aiming to perform straight bar dip, if they end up rolling backwards, even the slightest, that will invalidate your rep. Okay, so any part where this movement backwards occur before we conclude our rep, that will invalidate it. The rep or no rep example, pretty evident, but it's hard to spot by the side judge. This is going to be purely relying on a head judge to spot, is going to be chicken wing during transition, which means one wrist, elbow or shoulder traveling over the bar before or desynchronized with the other shoulder. Both shoulders must roll over the bar at the same time. Otherwise, the rep will be invalid. Here's an example of the right shoulder leading and causing a chicken wing. Now, left shoulder example. Any amount of unevenness between the shoulders will be considered a chicken wing and it will invalidate that rep. Another example of a no rep will be when the athlete ends up having contact with a PC4 bone, the wrist or the forearm with the bar on the pull or the transition point. If I'm starting my muscle up and my bottom of my wrist, so this bone here, PC4 bone, or the forearm itself end up touching the bar, this will invalidate my rep. Here's an example of a no rep on the first rep. Here is an example of a false grip on the pull to transition section. So we're starting with neutral or semi-false grip, that's fine, but then you'll see that my wrist ends up touching the bar as I try to attempt to perform the transition. This will also be an invalid attempt. This one is a no rep for two reasons. One, I ended up getting into a false grip during the transition, and my legs also exceeded the band. So this is a double example of a no rep. Again, it does happen sometimes. Another example of a no rep is going to be excessive back or hip or shoulder extension. It can be observed at the very initiation of a bar muscle up, and if my body breaks the line of, like straight line of the wrist, elbow, shoulder, hip, knees and ankles in either shoulder, hip or core, that will invalidate the rep as well. Back extension in the initial part of the muscle up. Those are both no reps. For athlete to begin the bar muscle up, the athlete will ensure that both the front judge and the side judges are ready, made eye contact, Athlete grabs the bar, the front judge is checking for straight arms, then audible go command will be performed by the front judge, combined with the visual command of putting the hand down. So once that happens, the athlete can initiate. It's really important. Don't forget straight arms as you come off the box. Now, another important thing to remember, the full lockout and coming to a controlled stop on the top is also required. So-called shotgun or explosive no-dip muscle-ups will not be permitted. Here's an example of one. So athlete technically locked out their arms, but they didn't come to a stationary position over the bar. This will invalidate the rep. So it's important that you come to a true stop. This is a no rep example of a shotgun muscle up or a invalid rep because of lack of stationary position or loss of control. Okay, another thing worth noting, when you approach the platform you're going to be performing your attempts at, it's important that you recognize you're responsible for your setup, aka position of the box, the height of the box, whether you would like to ask spotters to pull the box away on your first attempt so you can perform bigger backswings. All of these things are your responsibility only. If you're not happy with the way the platform is set up, when you approach it, you must request from the judges and the supporting staff and volunteers that the setup is adjusted to your requirements. So again, the height of the box, the position of the box, whether the box gets removed, it's at your discretion. Hitting the box on a swing back will not invalidate your rep in the bar muscle up as long as you initiate your bar muscle up as per required rules. So even if I hit the box on my backswing, that will not invalidate my muscle up attempt as long as I perform all the other elements of it correctly. That should conclude everything about bar muscle up setup, no reps, valid reps, and everything in between.